Hello, world. This is the Know Your Place podcast. On this week's episode, we're going to be talking about living in and traveling to the mountains and the beach, and which one is more preferable. Stay tuned. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Know Your Place podcast. I'm Charles Altendorf. I'm glad you all could make it today. This is my 14th episode, so it's been quite the journey. On this week's episode, I wanted to talk about something a little wacky or different. At least I try and do that every episode, but I think this week's episode is going to be even more wacky and different. I'm going to talk about the concept of mountains and beaches and human interaction with them. But I'm going to talk about it in the sense of tourism and living. See, the majority of humankind, I guess the biggest majority of humankind does live on the coast. But generally speaking, we tend to lean towards flat land or plains. We don't necessarily live right up against the coast, although a lot of us do, and there's a lot of big coastal cities. But for example, if you look at if you look at countries in Europe and even countries in America, although New York City and Los Angeles are technically on the coast, but if you look at Los Angeles, for example, the port of Los Angeles does touch the Pacific Ocean, but you do have to drive, or you in any one spot of Los Angeles, you're still at least 10 or 15 miles inland. You're not actually up on the coast, except for that one spot. Same thing with New York City. Technically speaking, to get to Manhattan, you have to go in a little ways from the Atlantic Ocean. You're not right up against the ocean. So we as humankind do still tend to congregate slightly inward and on plains lands, and it's even more a even bigger example of it is in the UK, London. London is not on the coast. You have to go drive, or you have to go again. I think you have to go 40 or 50 miles or something like that to get to the coast. Or Paris is not right on the coast. Berlin is way inland from the coast, and even Germany's biggest port town, Hamburg's not even on the coast. It's a river city. So to be a city and be directly on the coast, like Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and Sydney, I guess in Australia, is right up against the coast. But largely, we don't congregate directly onto the coast. So most of the time, when people talk about going on vacation, they're talking about either going to the beach or going to the mountains. Sometimes they are talking about going to the flat plains on the inland, but I would say this is a very rare experience. I don't think they do that very often. So the reason why I want to talk about this today is I just want to talk about what people like more. What's better? What's more interesting? And the reason why I say this is I've experienced a lot of things that talk about either one. One of my very favorite authors that I've talked about in other episodes of the show, Erich Maria Remarque, he had several different stories set in either location in Europe during the 40s. So he had some set in Marseille or Lisbon, and he had others set in the Alps, or it seemed like every novel his characters were in one or the other. They were in the Alps to go to the sanatorium, or they were on the coast on vacation. So and this is kind of interesting to me because when I was a kid, I lived in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is halfway in between the coast and the mountains in North Carolina, and you could drive 3 hours and do either one. So often it would be a decision: do you want to go see the mountains or the coast? what's more interesting? When you go to the beach, there's the automatic appeal of getting in the water, hearing the waves of the ocean splashing on the coastline, you know, the seeing the sand, there's some kind of human enrichment experience with that. But when you go to the mountains, you see things like more trees and, you know, the wind whips up more, I guess. I don't know, the wind does whip up in the coast as well, but you get this sense of being out there and being on a higher elevation. You see things you see great distances, and, it just feels like you're in nature more when you're in the mountains, generally speaking. At least in America. I would also say in Switzerland. I don't really know about in. I would say generally across the world. If somebody wants to come on my show and rebuke that, or write something nasty in the comments section about that, go right ahead and write something about that. So I guess let's go into this more and talk about sort of the positives and the negatives of the beach as both a tourist destination and a lifestyle. So, as a tourist, I think everybody at some point gets the desire to go be a tourist at a beach. I don't know why. I guess we want to feel like we can escape the land that we're anchored to. But everybody gets that desire, right? So, what typically happens? Well, first thing you have to do, you have to get separate gear, right? Like, you can't just go out there you can in your normal clothes, but generally speaking, you need to have a swimsuit, right? Or you have to go buy beach towels or coolers or things to bring stuff with, because most of the time the beach doesn't have all that stuff right there. Some beaches do, some have concession stands, but generally speaking, most of the ones I've been to don't. So you have to bring all that stuff, and then generally speaking, you have to drive a ways, and then more and more you have to pay to actually get on the beach now. Some places you still don't. You can still find free beaches. And then the thing that I always remember as a kid was every time you had to go to the beach, you have to fight all this traffic and find somewhere to park, and then you have to walk actually to the beach from the parking lot. And I was very excited though when my wife and I went on vacation to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where you could actually park right next to the beach and walk out into the water. But the water's a wee bit colder, and those beaches are a wee bit more remote than the average beach. So, but yeah, and it's better if you know how to swim when you go to the beach. And I am not the greatest swimmer in the world, but I still like the beach. So yeah, those are the things that are annoying, right? And if you choose to stay near the beach because you don't want to drive all the way home, because most people travel a great distance when they go to the beach, you have to you have to pay an exorbitant amount of money. The hotels are generally more expensive next to the beach, and it's just kind of a hassle, right? It's a big hassle. It's a hassle to go to the beach. And then, of course, you also have to wear sunscreen, and then often you get sunburnt anyway. And, why don't we do this to ourselves? I don't know. I don't know why we do this to ourselves, but we love it. We humans love it. We love to congregate near some kind of attraction, I guess. We have this natural inclination. So anyway, that's what I think of when I think of traveling to the beach. Now, living at the beach is a whole nother story, right? Because, people often would just buy a vacation house and live next to the beach. But, part of the year. But the trouble with living near the beach, especially if you're on the Atlantic Ocean in the United States, is you're always under threat from hurricanes or storms. You're always worried, will my house get knocked down? And then you put up with all the other hassles, like on, I don't know how many of the fans of the show heard, HGTV is classic for having these shows like House Hunters, but they have another show called Beachfront Bargain Hunt. And all it is these people going around trying to find houses near the beach at a good deal. And let me tell you something. There are no houses at a beach with a good deal. I mean, again, you're paying like half a mil for any decent house near the beach. Probably more, sometimes less, but then you really have to put up with some things like I gotta walk 10 blocks to get to the beach, or my house is really small. It has 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, or it's in a floodplain. Anyway, so I don't know why we do this to ourselves. But yeah, so those are things you have to put up with living on the beach. And then once you live there, I would say generally speaking, when you live near a beach, you're constantly surrounded by people. There's always people coming and going in your town, which isn't necessarily bad. I mean, I guess it's a cool thing if your town is a nice place and people like to be tourists there. I guess that's just something good about your town. But I don't know if you would want that, right? Like, I mean, who likes seeing a bunch of randos coming into your town for part of the year, and then you got to deal with having that stuff there for the rest of the year? That's sort of the problem of my parents' hometown. It's on Lake Michigan, and it's got all this stuff built up for the peak of summer, when it's actually nice to be on the lake there. And what do you do with all that stuff during the winter? And there's still not a very good answer, because the winters are very cold there in Wisconsin. So anyway, despite how much I dream about living on the lake or living right next to a body of water, that's probably why I don't, is because I don't know if I could put up with those things. I just don't know. I'd want to say I could, I want to say, oh, I would love the view and I would tolerate the extra money, the extra trouble, the extra hassle, but I never seem able to do it. So that brings me to, well, if you don't like the beach, but again, this middle ground of plainsy area is boring to you, why not the mountains, right? Like, don't we all love mountains? Being up real high and feeling like everybody else is an ant, or that helps you get away from things, right? So when I was a kid, when we didn't go to the beach, we went to Asheville, North Carolina. It was great, right? You're up there, you're way up there. No, you had all these trees and different elevations, and there's just constantly different winding paths and directions, and it feels like you're out. You feel so separated from all the people and the hustle and bustle. Except for when you're not, when you're in a complete tourist trap like Asheville, North Carolina, or the Smokies, right? I mean, I remember I stayed out at a cabin once with a group out in the Smokies, and I was like, oh, this feels great. It feels so remote. And then I noticed around the corner there were a bunch of people, right? You turn around another road and there's a bunch of people. And it's like, well, is this really remote, or am I just pretending it's remote because I have a little bit of a higher wall of earth between me and the next person, or a couple more trees between me and the next person than I would if I was back in town? I don't know. So, let's talk about the mountains a little more, though. So, what's great about vacationing at the mountains is, again, you do have a wall of earth between you and people. You have a cabin. You can go. I think we romanticize a bit of the. Oh, I feel all hardy and different and out in the woods. I feel like I'm. I don't know. I feel like I've become back to sort of more primitive humanhood, right? This is. I don't think people who are staunch urbanites really like visiting the mountains. I could be wrong though. I'm sure I'll get comments from the comment section. No, actually, I do like visiting the mountains. I don't know what you're talking about. So and you feel more connected to nature, I guess, right, when you're out at the mountains. But the hassle of traveling out to mountains is, generally speaking, at some point in time, you're going to drive on a very dangerous road. And I'm not just talking about the fact that it's windy, but it's going to be hilly, and generally speaking, you'll come across one or two rough roads, because up in the mountains, a lot of times, the cities there, even if they are tourist trapped, don't have the money to pay to maintain the roads to the same degree. Or, it's just really hard to maintain a road up the side of a cliff. It doesn't matter how much money you throw at it, it's always going to be rough and falling off and, doing all this stuff. And, that can get freaky. Like, I remember one time my parents and I were driving out to Boone, North Carolina, which is where Appalachian State University is. It was pouring rain, and the road was really windy and hilly, obviously, and it was kind of scary. I mean, we got there okay, obviously, but it's a lot different than if we'd been in Raleigh. We wouldn't have been quite as afraid, I don't think, So, that's the issue I see with traveling there. It's quite a undertaking. You have to be physically stronger to travel there, and then once you're there, the main attraction is to go hiking. I mean, maybe you go look at kitschy crafts and stuff, but the main attraction is to go hiking. So you also have to be physically ready to do that. Now, I bet I'm not implying at all I'm not physically fit. I'm probably actually very physically fit for my age, and I go hiking all the time next to where I live, but you have to be ready to just be hiking. You have to be ready to do some intense hiking. You have to be ready to, get going. So if you don't want that, let's say if you're just not in the mood for the remoteness, then the mountains aren't for you if that's not what you're feeling that day. And that sort of leads me into what it's like living in the mountains. So everybody always says, "Oh, it's great to live in the mountains. I got this wonderful view." But what they don't talk about is what I was talking about earlier. Often it's more sparse, so there's not enough of a tax base, so you've got some crazy treacherous roads to get out to where you live. So if something bad happens, you could be stranded for weeks on end. Now, I'm sure that's okay with some people, but it is kind of nice not to be as well. Or if you get a place like Asheville or somewhere like that gets real built up in the mountains, does it feel like the mountains anymore? Is it the mountains anymore? Even the Smokies, right? Some people say, even after this wildfire that just happened, does it feel like the Smokies anymore now that there's hundreds of thousands, there's millions of tourists that come there every year? I'm sure the people who grew up there 40 years ago were like, "Hey, man, this doesn't feel like the same anymore. I don't want these people here." But they bring them money, so they can't really turn them away, So yeah, I would be a little worried about the remoteness. I love a view. Don't get me wrong. The views in some of these mountain houses I've seen, these cabins, they're breathtaking. They're awesome. But even like when I was living in this one spot in Indiana that had a really hilly county next to it, and I could have chosen to live over there, I didn't choose to. I was just like, one of these days this road will get bad, and somebody died on the road that goes out there from the main city. Somebody had died when it snowed because it was treacherous, right? It is, so that's probably why at the end of the day, even though we love all these little trips we take to these places, most people end up in the plains. They don't end up in the mountains or the beach. But, we romanticize these places. How many movies or books are set in one or the other? You romanticize them. You think in your mind, like, "Oh, this is so much better than where I currently live in the flat middle," or "I live around all these people. I want to go to the mountains and be not around people," or "I just want to escape to the beach. It's so cold here. I'm going to go to the beach and feel warm. The sun's going to open on me and reflect off the sand." So yeah, that's what I think about both things. I don't know if I have a favorite out of the two to vacation in. I guess I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. But which one do you all prefer? Leave me a comment in the comment section. Thanks for listening. Check out the Know Your Place podcast on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/knowyourplacepodcast, all one word, or on Facebook at facebook.com/knowyourplacepodcast, all one word. And we will be coming soon to YouTube and iTunes, and maybe another social media platform near you. Special thanks to my wife, Sarah, and Jay Graff for the riff.